Mayor,
Yes,
just a quick heads up. Jerry, his computer is updating, so he
Oh,
may just it always happens at the best times,
yeah.
right? So he will be here, but he may be a little bit late.
Okay, so we should go ahead and start
I think
without
so.
his presence.
I
Okay,
think he'll be here any minute. I just wanted to give you a heads up. I keep
okay,
watching for him.
okay. And then I see Catherine is here.
Yay!
Hey, congratulations, Catherine. Nice to have you with us. It looks like we are about 2 o'clock. So, knowing that Jerry will be joining us very soon, we will go ahead and call this council work session to order. Today is September 13th, 2023, and the time is 2 o'clock. This is open to the public via Zoom. Because this is a work session, there will be no public comment and no decisions, will be made by the council. We want to welcome all citizens who are joining us and thank you for your commitment to Manzanita. The agenda for today's meeting includes an update from the Short-Term Rental Committee and a dark sky ordinance. There will also be a discussion led by Ms. Aman, our city manager, regarding 20 is plenty. And I can't wait to see what that's all about. So, Linda, it looks like I will turn this over to you to introduce the STR committee. Is that
Okay.
right?
Oh, there's Jerry. Yay!
Yeah, welcome, Jerry.
I think I scared him away. The short-term rental committee has been working really hard to deliver results. They have identified some educational outreach programs that are kind of the low-hanging fruit, and you will see those today. Many of the issues that they face are really long-term that require a great deal of analysis and discussion, which they have been in the process of prioritizing. The committee has proven to be a really thoughtful group of people. I'm really impressed with the commitment of both time and energy to this. They work on projects outside of the meeting time and come back with results that have taken a lot of time. They're really taking this seriously, and I think it bodes very well for us as we move forward. The leadership has been excellent as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Newhouse, who will present some of the products that they have put together. You're on, Joe.
Thanks. As Linda said, the purpose is just to give you an update since we last talked to you and gave you results of the survey comments. Since that time, one of the things we did right away was to put the survey results onto the city website and also put on a map that showed the number of STR people who responded in each area and a little bit. It's a very simple map, but it shows kind of the feelings in different areas of town, not by zones, but just we did areas by the beach, away from the beach, so on and so forth. So those are the things. We also just tweaked the website a little bit, took off some old information and consolidated some other things, so it's just a little easier to see. We also talked in the committee about recommending a night sky ordinance go citywide, but you beat us to it, so never mind and thanks. We brainstormed a lot of topics right after we got the survey results and decided to tackle education on current regulations as a simple first step, as Linda said. And so this led to the compilation of two things. One is we call it the Good Neighbor brochure, and the other is window film. And I know you've seen them, but I just, as a public thing, want to walk you through what they are and why we're doing it. I'll start with the window film. And I know this is small, but I'll make it big in just a second. So this is a window film. It'll be 6 inches by 8 inches. and it'll be clear, and it's designed to just stick on a window. We had originally started with the idea of kitchen magnets that just had short-term rental information. And in talking to several people, including Nan Devlin from the Tillamook County Visitors Association, realized that most people don't have refrigerators anymore that magnets stick on. And so window film just became a better way to do it. But this is just basically something, this will go to everyone, residents, part-time residents, full-time residents, short-term rental owners, renters, whoever basically we get an address for. And the reason for that is that it has a lot of information that is important to everybody, not just short-term rental houses. But we did want to make sure that we got short-term rental information up there about what do you do if you have a problem. So we tried to put that kind of up near the top. Do I need to make this bigger, or can you kind of see?
It's actually pretty big.
Mine is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we start with the non-emergency. We start with 911, and then non-emergency numbers. How to sign into Nexel. Medical, everything we could fit on there. Oregon poison control is a good thing to know when you have somebody poisoned. It's hard. That's a hard number to find. Hospitals, urgent care, and Nehalem Bay Health Center and Pharmacy, otherwise known as the Reinhardt Clinic. Short-term rentals, we ask that you call the agent or owner first for an immediate attention. And then we put in the ways to get that information, either by the sign on the outside of the house or on the website. And then also included Max's phone number.
And Max is the
Code enforcement officer.
Code enforcement officer.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then other things, trip check. What do you do when you got a power outage? Number. You can either call the number, you can go on the internet. If you find a dead or injured animal on the beach, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then where the recycling center is. This film, it was suggested originally by Nan Devlin again. They used something similar in, I believe, Bay City.
South County.
Yeah. But it's just, we tweaked it for Manzanita. The amazing news to me is that the Tillamook County Visitors Association will do the printing, and they'll do a better job, by the way, than this looks. Some of these things are out of alignment. I did it on my Word document, and they have better tools than I do, but this at least gives them the format of what we're looking for. Someone pointed out in the last meeting that the 911 has its own logo that says 911, so we'll use that instead. I'd also like to see the city's logo on this, and also I'm sure the Visitors Association will want their logo on it. So those things will be added, but this gives you the meat of what would be in it. They will also do all of the mailing for us and pay for it, which is, again, pretty amazing. So it's no cost to the city, but it'll get out to everybody. Questions on this before we move on? Sure. I don't know if I call on you, Deb calls on you. But
Catherine, yes, you're recognized. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm learning the ropes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you said that about the branding, because clearly that needs to be the base, to present the information. The content looks great. I'm just thinking as a homeowner here, so I get this, and where do you envision me putting this in my house? Like on a window in my house?
Yeah, on a window. It goes on a window, yeah.
Okay.
like in your kitchen, in your living room. I don't care. I don't care where you put it. Just somewhere where I would say by your phone, but nobody's got.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Right. I don't think it makes a lot of difference necessarily, but I don't know, my practical orientation to things. I'm not sure these will really end up on Windows for people who live there full time. I could definitely see it in a rental, put up in a prominent spot so you see it right when you get there. But for somebody who's there year round, more than likely it's going to end up in a drawer. Now I'm old school, so I've got my Nehalem telephone books, like 3 of them. It's probably going to go in a drawer with that. So just that it be sturdy enough to, do well being put into some environment other than on a window, because I doubt that would really happen for most homeowners. That's my observation. The content looks really good, and clearly a lot of thought went into that. Thanks.
It's a good idea. I'll talk about that with Nan and see what kind of material will stick on a window or be in a drawer, which something that we haven't done yet need to do. It needs a cover letter. This and the brochure, which will be mailed at the same time, needs a cover letter that says, this is why you're getting it, and this is what to do with it. And that might help with that some.
One thing, Joe, I know when I've traveled, sometimes there's the phone number for emergencies, and they generally have the address listed there, because as you come in as a short-term rental person, you may not quite have the address when you're calling emergency services. Is there a place maybe at the bottom where the address could be written in by people so that it's all there together? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, and I'm thinking window film. I'm not sure how you can write on window film except with a magic marker, probably.
So what address are you looking for, Deb? What address?
The address of the house. So if I call, if I'm staying in a home and I call 911, they say, what is your address?
I see.
If I'm looking at this and I don't happen to have my rental paper right handy, I may not know it off the top of my head. So I was just thinking for short-term rental people, that having that address listed with this resource would be a good addition.
It would be, and maybe it can go in the cover letter that says,
that's what I was thinking.
If this is a short-term rental, use a magic marker and put the address on the bottom.
There you go. Yeah, something so that people have that information.
Okay. Cheryl Ogburn, who's also on our committee, suggests, Catherine, that you can probably, being that it's designed to stick on a window, will probably also stick on the inside of a cabinet. That could be an answer too. Any other questions?
No, I think that looks really good, and a lot of work went into, determining what should be there. And I think you did a good job on that with the addition of the logos. I think that will.
And it will have the logos.
Yeah.
So I was thrilled to see the animal resources there as well, because we need to remind people where we live. We're sharing it with other critters.
Right.
Good.
The downside is generally they'll tell you, leave it alone.
Yeah. Right.
Let it die. This is the Good Neighbor brochure, and this is the one half of it. This is a brochure, so it'll be folded. So the part that said, the column that says Good Neighbors, that would be the front of the brochure. The part that says short-term rental questions would be the back when it's all folded up. And then this section here that talks about Manzanita being friendly, good neighbors, would be the first fold on the inside. The picture is done by Lori Dillon, and there's going to be more pictures here. She just hasn't finished, so we'll have some more pictures on this side. You'll see some of the other ones inside. Again, the logo, and I don't know who knows the answer to this, probably Layla. Layla, is this the official city logo, or is there another one? This is the one I always see on Zoom.
It is
Okay.
the official city logo at the moment, yeah.
Okay. So this would be on here, and I'm sure that the Visitor Association will want their logo stuck on somewhere. So we'll again have them do that when they do this printing. We're not sold on the color either, just in case you're artistically inclined. But that's, again, we'll work with the Visitor Association on that. So you'll have the good neighbor thing. When you open it up, the first thing you'll see is the orange lettering here about Manzanita. It will go to all those people, again, the full-time residents, part-timers, vacationers. We're going to leave copies in the visitor center, and that's how we'll get to the vacationers and day trippers. It'll go to all the short-term rental owners. Our theory is if everybody is a good neighbor, there's going to be, in one sense, less complaints from people that think that the people down the street that are having that loud, noisy party must be short-term renters. It could be a full-timer, it could be a part-timer, who knows? But if everybody has the expectation that they should be a good neighbor, it can only help. Again, the short-term rental questions. What do you do? How do you do it? And then the number of the code enforcement officer and also the non-emergency police line. Questions on any part of this page before we get to the what's inside?
Is there someplace, Joe, where it shows who compiled this information?
It does not. And we could put it on the this page right here because we have some room. The inside is packed, but there is some room here. Again, for instance, I asked Lori Dillon, do you want credit? And she said, yeah, it's usually on the along with the who did it and who's put it out. And it does need this is put out by the city of Manzanita, okay, the Visitors Association. So that there is room on that last page.
Okay.
Other questions?
So, Joe, is the Visitor Center going to pay for this out of TLT money? Is that what's covering the cost of proving?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful, I think.
Yeah, it is.
Because it is for visitors and full-timers, but it's also for visitors. So this will be the inside when you open it again, when it's totally unfolded. We tried to hit as many of the hot topics from the survey as we could, and then added some other things like tsunamis and fires. And again, you'll be happy to see, Deb, there's stuff about wildlife. Do you want me to go through each one, or? We worked hard on trying to make it not STR exclusive. So in parking, for instance, rather than talking about what the rules are for short-term rentals, we just talked about parking in general. Same with pets, same with recreational vehicles. We just tried to make it so it would apply to everybody.
So the overnight occupancy of RVs and trailers are not allowed in the city of Manzanita. Is there a map that goes with this that shows the city limits, or
No.
no? Does that mean all the city limits of Manzanita?
Yeah, I just took this directly from the ordinance.
Okay. Okay. You covered a lot of turf here, Joe.
This was a joint effort.
I'm sure it was, of course, yes.
Although the majority of the efforts came from Carol Kennedy and Cheryl Ogburn.
Okay.
But
And I'm glad to see the burning restrictions and the fires on the beach. That's a really good thing. Yeah, it looks great. To approach your feet. So will a tsunami evacuation map be mailed out with this brochure? I know it's available at the visitor center, but will it also, can we
it
put one?
is over the limit of postage, but it's required in every short-term rental house, and it is at the visitor center.
Okay.
And actually, we have a limited number left. So the ones, it's really important to get them into the short-term rentals. And then in each area, we have a specific map for an area. And so that would be available, but I don't see putting it in the mailer.
Okay.
Anything else? Just give you a couple more minutes to kind of look at it.
Actually, Dan just suggested we might put links to the maps, and the maps I think we might put links to are the Beat the Wave maps, which specifically, well, that can't be. No, we'd have to do a big the Halem Bay region map, which we could put the link, a Dogami link, on the bottom of tsunami and earthquake preparedness.
Linda, isn't it on the EVCNB website also?
It is. It is.
But you're trying to get everything in one place for people. I mean, I think the links are a great idea if you can fit them in, Joe.
Okay.
I'll get you the link and you can see what you want to do with it.
Yeah, we can take the type down another.
Provide reading glasses.
Okay, if we can fit it in, it's not.
I would say if you can fit it in, that would work.
Also, remember that this is a hard copy, so no one's going to be able to click on the link.
That's right. Oh, that's right.
So they're just going to have to type it in themselves, and yeah, it might be better off not actually.
Okay.
Anything else?
Well, you have a link here under the fires.
Right. This is at the bottom, the www.evcnb.org is also a link. It just doesn't show as a link.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Okay.
And I'll make sure a map is easy to access on the website.
Okay. Okay. And again, we'll have, she's got a couple more pictures. She's got a picture of an elk or a deer and probably a little fire and stuff like that there, just to make it more visually appealing.
Well, I kind of like your snail and recycling. I think those are kind of cute.
That's not, yes, those, I thought you said the snail for the recycling. The snail
Snail and the recycling.
Something. Yeah, she did a great job.
That's a good job, Joe. Thank you very much.
Okay, so then the question becomes, what's next? At the last meeting we had last month for the short-term rental committee, there were a lot of ideas about where to go next. And one thing that we realized is that some of the issues weren't ours to solve. Traffic on the street, for instance, was a pretty high score on the "this bothers me" on the survey. Housing for workers, pets that may or may not belong to the SDR visitors, et cetera. And again, they're not really ours to solve. They're more city issues. And the whole discussion at our last meeting, I don't know how many of you were there, but it got a little disjointed. And it was kind of frustrating. And so as a result, near the end, we kind of decided that we were going to make a concerted effort to focus on one goal at a time. And so offline, as Linda says, we tend to do work not in the committee to get ready for the next committee meeting. Patrick Johnson put together a list of priorities based on the survey results, and then and also what the council has asked us to look at. And then we had members of the committee rank them via email. And so our next meeting is this coming Friday, the day after tomorrow. And based on the results of that prioritizing, our topic for Friday will be re-envisioning a citywide limit. And by citywide limit, I'm talking either percentage or cap. And that's one of the issues that's going to come up. Should it be a percentage? Would we rather recommend it's a cap? And if we recommend a percentage, like the old 17.5%, should HOAs that exclude SDRs be excluded from that percentage? If we pick a total number, like the current 230 plus the C1 and R4 zones, should it be 230? Should it be 200? Should it be 250? You know, what kind of number do we want to recommend to you? Also, should it include the commercial zone and the R4 zone? I've heard things both ways. I've heard, no, the C1 and the R4 should be included in the cap. I've also heard, gee, that's the commercial area where people are expecting traffic. Maybe we should funnel STRs to that zone. So that's going to be a topic of conversation also. I don't have the answer at this point for you. I'd love to hear some of your opinions, but those are some of the things we're going to be talking about Friday. If we come up with a cap number or a percentage number, should it be revisited every so often? And if so, what's the so often? Should it be 3 years? Should it be 5 years? Should it be 10 years? That's another item of discussion. So there's no cut and dry to, I think, anything we're doing. There's a lot of different issues that come up and people say, gee, well, did you think about this? And so that's kind of the work that we'll be doing. And then our hope is to come up with some recommendations in the next few months and present them to the council. Before I go to what comes after that, comments or questions about a citywide limit that you'd like us to consider while we're debating?
Joe, I have a comment. I think you're right. There are many sub issues to consider in that broad topic, and there's not a lot of cut and dry answers. And I would encourage the committee not to force yourselves into a definite answer on many of those. I think you'd be doing a great service to the council just by bringing back to us sort of a fleshed out outline of the discussion, so that we could see what different committee members and different stakeholders and different community members are thinking about on all of these issues. And, the council ultimately is going to have to make those decisions. I think the council is better served by having the full array of choices in front of us. There are some more pointed questions, like should an HOA's housing inventory affect the cap if we go percentage based? Yeah, you could probably give us a hard position on something like that. But I would welcome the committee's sort of developing the conversation for us so that we can then hopefully reach a better considered decision on some of these issues rather than have you feel like you have to come to us with hard recommendations on each of the subtopics.
Good point. Okay. I'll make sure that happens.
So, Jerry, are you thinking about having kind of pros and cons to different?
Yeah. I think, from the conversations with the counselors that we had, we could have really different conversations depending upon who was in a room on a given day. And even within a session, we would have contrasting views in the room. And so I think I think one of the real values of having this committee is that it can help us better understand the complexity and the textured nature of the conversations that are going on around the city. We're ultimately going to have to make some tough calls, I'm assuming, on STR policy. But if the committee can sort of tee up those decisions by really getting into the discussions amongst themselves, and also obviously they have a way of tapping into the community and stakeholders to give some good input along the way. I think it would be hard for the committee to hold itself to having a firm recommendation on the 17 sub-issues under reimagining the limit. So rather than force yourselves into those 17 hard decisions, decide the ones that are easier or more straightforward. And on the more complex ones, by all means, give us 2 or 3 or 4 different viewpoints and perspectives. And they're going to be familiar to us. We've heard them, but we don't have the singular focus that you guys have. And so you're able to develop them a little bit further. And what we're all looking to avoid are unintended consequences. So we don't want to make policy choices that look good in the moment, but end up costing us down the road.
Right.
For example, I think when the cap was first put in, I presume it was put in because the percentage was thought to be a permissible livability impact on full-time residents.
It was, Jerry, it was put in because that was the current percentage.
I understand that, but it was also a percentage that people could live with. But because it operates on a percentage basis, what I don't know is, did we have the same ratio of full-time homes to second homes way back then that we have now? Given the ratio we have now, that percentage has resulted in a certain number of permits. Maybe that would have been a different number if the ratio that was present in the 90s is markedly different than what we have now. So those unintended consequences are the best way to avoid them is to be looking at the 2 or 3 or 4 different options closely, rather than just saying yay or nay on a particular recommendation.
I guess the way envisioning it is exactly what you said, but maybe a little bit of here's the way we're leaning. In other words, to say, here's the pros to take the 17 or the cap. Right, here's the pros of 17 and a half. Here's the pros of the cap. We would lean towards the cap for these reasons.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. But what I don't want you to do, I think, is spin your wheels trying to get to a definite recommendation on some of these issues when it's equally valuable to the council to have just the benefit of your full conversation. And you'll know that in the process. You'll as you get into it, you'll know the questions that are more difficult to answer, and those might be the ones that you're better off teeing up for us the 2 or 3 options that we need to consider.
I also think one advantage that this committee has is because of the way it was set up. We have short-term rental owners. We have people who live in a high density area that aren't thrilled with short-term rentals. We have people who live in who are not short-term rental owners, but like STRs. So it was set up so that there would be a really good cross section. And I think that will help us come to some fair conclusions. No one's going to be thrilled with everything. And
well, one of the things I've noticed, Joe, is just that there's a good eclectic mix. And because you guys think about this much more than the rest of us think about this, there are issues that you guys surface that are like, wow, that really is an issue. So I really agree with Jerry. I think if you can come back with some options, pros and cons, given the depth of information you all have regarding short-term rentals, I think that would be really, really helpful. Just as a heads up, we currently have 8 licenses open with no waiting list. Right. So that's another piece of information that maybe says, will affect the cap or the number. So that's an interesting point. Catherine, did you have something?
Yeah, I've got a couple things, but it's been good to wait because I've benefited from listening to everybody else so far. I guess a few things come to mind. First of all, I think I'm in full agreement with Jerry on the usefulness of a group that can go really deep into this, be thoughtful, have done the homework to not come with solutions that aren't actual solutions, because they have consequences that are not acceptable to the city, particularly financially. So that's good. I'm wondering about a couple of things that I don't know how they fit into the mandate that the committee has. So you all could help me with that, or Joe, you may have an opinion. I guess I'd wonder how you would restate what it is you're solving. What is it you intend, and maybe not in this meeting, but in your work, what is it you're solving? It's not happiness for everybody. It's not coming up with something that every single person will agree with and think is great. Although if you do that, my hat's off to you. That would be terrific. So again, I think a good look within your committee and just to be clear on what it is you're solving in this next piece of work is important. The other thing I'm wondering about is how current market conditions and or forecasts by the tourism organizations, by the county, by the areas around us, how they might fit into a good discussion for our city on this. If we're looking at changing numbers, increasing, decreasing, we can't do that. We shouldn't do that responsibly in a complete vacuum that ignores what's going on around us in the UGB and the communities surrounding us. And if there is something going on with the market, and people speculate about this all the time, and I don't have an answer to it, but you've got some people now saying it's really peaked out, people are shifting. You got other people who say there's more demand than ever, and we expect that to be a constant demand. And I think being a little bit better informed about thinking about the next 3, 5, 10-year forecasts for that, I'll just call it the industry. It's not my favorite word, but the short-term rental industry in our area and the surrounding area, and also knowing what the surrounding areas are doing would be just really important for us to consider when we're looking at any kind of a policy change on this, whether it's numbers or not, because we just would want to be smarter and smart enough to know what's happening around us. So those are a couple of thoughts I had while I've been listening to you all.
I love that question. And I think that what are we solving should be foremost in our minds when we are looking at every single one of the issues. Because sometimes I think we just want to solve it because somebody brought it up in a meeting somewhere, and
Yeah.
it's only one person that had that problem in the last 10 years. So I think it's a really excellent mindset to think of. I hope we can, as you what we bring to you each time. One of the things that we always do is look at what's going on around us, whether it's Tillamook County, whether it's Canna Beach. We also look at what's going on in South Carolina and Florida, because anything we can pick up from what someone else is doing that helps. So
Well, I do want to point out on this first question from Catherine that this issue in particular, reimagining the limit, the cap, that is particularly germane to the council's action back in March of 22 to freeze the cap, and at the same time to begin investigating alternative revenue sources. So the short-term rental committee presumably would exist if we never did those two things, because it is a dominant impact in town for positive and less positive ways, in positive and less positive ways, and because you've done the good work you've done so far on the educational efforts and obviously the work that preceded the committee from the work group in reforming the ordinance. But specifically, we are on the clock right now. We are a year and a half into a 3-year experiment where we have changed the town's limit on STRs, and we are exploring other revenue sources. And so within that 3-year experiment, the question you're asking, Joe, is very, very pertinent, very germane. We do need to, as a council, we do need to revisit what we want to do with the cap as we approach March of 2025. So I'm glad that this issue has risen to the top of your list. I'm glad you're ready to take it on.
That was why. Exactly
yeah,
why.
Well, good. Okay, thank you. But I agree with you with the broader concern that, as you get into, and you've been in various livability conversations, you really got to make sure you're solving a problem that broadly exists, and it's not just an anecdotal problem among a small handful. So I hope that's part of your answer, Catherine, because I do think we need to honor the reason why we froze the thing in the first place, and honor the conditions upon which our city attorney advised us we could freeze it for 3 years. So thank you for taking it on.
Joe, I had a couple of questions. One, what would be helpful, particularly if you're looking at a cap, is to understand, I mean, that whole HOA inclusion of STRs or not. You have such a brain trust on this committee that I'm certain they could pull together the numbers so that we can look at the picture with those eyes. Like, if the cap is this and we don't include HOAs or HOAs exclude STRs, it means this. And also taking those numbers and looking at them in terms of what impact they have on neighborhoods in the city, because there's some highly saturated areas, as we all know.
Yeah, and that gets into the next priority, not this one. So this one is just an answer to, should it be a cap? Should it be percentage? What should it include? What should it be? The next on the agenda we'll talk about, and that would be the density, occupancy, timing, etc.
Okay, so more nuts and bolts at that point. And Linda, you mentioned that you were going to pull together the notes from the conversation with counselors that happened. Do you take those ideas and present them to the STR committee at their meeting, or have you met with? Where are we in that process?
We had in one meeting we had a conversation about it, and then I forwarded the compilation of notes from Brad, Jerry, and myself to the committee, and they've taken those and looked at them, and some of them were consistent with what they were doing, and some added some information.
Okay.
So I think it was helpful. I think it was added information for them.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's all been delivered.
Yeah, it was right after the completion.
Okay,
of the
great.
process.
Great. Thank you for doing that.
So
Jeff,
sorry.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Here's a question from a different angle. Does the committee need any support from council for things you're not working on, that you might have people that are distressed about and would be distressed that you're not dealing with them, or is everything good on that front?
I think that will always be the case. I think the council gives us that support. I think that the addition of Max and Mike also looking at ordinance compliance helps with that. So for instance, I know in the last couple of weeks, there have been 2 instances that I've been directly asked about, what do we do about this? What do we do about that? One was a parking issue. One was a lighting issue. And it was really nice to be able to say, here's what you do. First, you call the owner agent. If that doesn't get you anywhere, then you call the compliance officer number. And then when they did that, which they both did, then the compliance officer was able to go talk to the short-term renter, was able to talk to the person making the complaint, was able to talk to someone at the city to find out what the policy is, and it got resolved. So I think in that sense, we've come a long way towards being able to take these one-off complaints and deal with them. I think in another case, it was a lighting issue, and it came up during one of the conversation with counselor meetings. I talked with Mike directly about it, and Max, he was also in on the call. And I think you'll see some of the results of that conversation when you get to the night sky ordinance. So I think it's working well. There will always be the one-off complaints that need city intervention, but hopefully we can get that intervention. And so far, I think it's been working okay.
Well, to add to that, one of the things that we've learned as we've gone along is what is the role of staff and what is the role of the short-term rental committee, and how can we work together effectively? Because staff is really the one that has to come up with the ordinance language, but with the recommendations from the short-term rental committee, it helps them put together a stronger and less loopholed ordinance. So I think the partnership between the city and short-term rental has been really effective.
Yeah.
Hey, it does sound like it is. And Joe, thank you very much for your time and just presentation. Yes.
One more thing, because I think it's important.
Okay.
Several of you, and that's the next thing on the agenda will be, we're calling it occupancy, but it's really 3 different things. It's density. Should there be quotas by street or by distance between each house? And here's where it just gets really nuanced and gets to Catherine's question, what are we solving? So if your particular problem is that you've got houses on 2 sides of you and they're both party houses, If we say you can only have one, well, you still have a party house next to you, so it doesn't really solve the problem. So what are we solving when we're trying to do it by distance? What are we solving when we're trying to do it by street? Those are some of the things we're going to have to look at when we get to what can we do about density. One of the things that we may be looking at and giving you some insight on is, can we do it by timing? There are some nearby towns that say you can only rent X number of times a year, or you can only rent X number of days a year. So how does that look, and how does that work for other cities? That's something we'll be looking at. Also by specific homes. The county just passed an ordinance that said that the limits on occupancy will be 10 for houses that have 4 bedrooms and 12 for houses who have 5 or more bedrooms. They've gotten rid of all you can have 18 people in a house if you've got 9 bedrooms. So we'll look at that and we'll see if there's something that we want to recommend that way. We'll look at, maybe we can limit rentals in homes that have X number of complaints. That's another way to look at things. And again, I don't have any answers at this point, but those will be some of the things that we'll look at. And this is a long-term project. We'll start it soon, but it'll take us months to wade through all the intricacies of that. And we'll be looking for your input in all of those issues over the coming year. Also high on the list for the coming year is tracking complaints. Right now, we really don't have a method for doing that. So we don't know. Judy, for instance, only gets 4 or 5 a year because only 4 or 5 were coming to her. That doesn't mean that there were only 4 or 5 complaints. Complaints that come to Manzanita Beach Getaways or Vacasa or anyone, or a private STR owner. We don't track those. Should we? I don't know. Would it help us? It may. Again, what are we solving? If we can find out that there are 1 or 2 specific houses, maybe we focus on those. I mean, it's kind of like, I've said this other ways, but Deb, when you were a teacher, if you have a room of 30 kids and one of them is doing something bad, do you make everybody stay after school? You try to get to the kid that's doing something bad. And so maybe tracking complaints is a way to do that. So we'd like to look at different methods that might make sense as a way to do that. Again, the code enforcement officer, I think, will help with that. We're not saying that we, the SDR committee, should track them. We're not saying that Judy, as a staff person in charge of short-term rentals, should add to her workload. We're just saying, will it do us any good? And what are some ways that it might be able to be done?
I could jump in real quick on this. Staff's actually already been discussing this and how, as and when code enforcement or PD do respond to short-term rental specific complaints, that we would develop a tracking mechanism of our own to do that. We'll be actually tracking all code enforcement. And so we would have that data. I would say that any kind of sharing of that data would need to be aggregated to protect privacy and that sort of thing, but we would at least be able to provide information in terms of how many of the code citations were issued and which ones were for short-term rentals and what types of code. But I don't think staff would be amenable to, say, sharing a list of offenders with a public committee. I think we do have some privacy issues we want to be careful about. So that's already underway, and that's already kind of part of what we're working on. So
agreed. Sorry, Era. The problem is it still doesn't to Vacasa's complaints or Manzanita Beach Getaways complaints. We're not tracking those. What the county has done, for instance, is say, you have to, and you have to let us see them. You have to let us, the county, see them. And again, that gets into the privacy issues. We as a short-term rental commission don't want to see it. We don't want to see the addresses, but do we want to say?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know how the county is compelling a private organization to collect that data. How they're doing that. That would be helpful, because I think that's actually a big challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And does it work? And so we'll let them be the guinea pigs. And so that's down the line. And then we'll also take a look at the current ordinance and see if there's anything else that we need to look at again or tweak, or see if, for instance, I think we're finding that what the work group wrote for parking ordinance is not real workable for the city and staff, and that probably is going to end up needing to be tweaked. So we'll be looking at those kind of things down the year too.
Okay. All right. Anything to add from Catherine? Anything to add?
Just thank you. And I assume after your meeting, you'll come back with the priority list and the sense of timing. I feel almost like you've kind of done the classic thing of adding everything back in after we talk about the one big priority, but you're the one who's got the sense of what the capacity of the group is. So I think it's clear what the priority would be around helping to get kind of our next serious policy discussion about the cap, and then go at it as you can. And I'm glad, sorry.
I think what we did is we knocked it down to 5 priorities, and we took out some of the things like traffic on my street, even though that was one of the main complaints. Yes, we still have a lot on the plate, but we'll just do one at a time and see how that works.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
Well, Linda, anything to add?
No, I really appreciate the work of the short-term rental committee. They are really working hard at bringing information and looking for solutions to bring to us. So I really appreciate the work they're doing.
Yeah, it's a very energetic group.
It is.
Any conclusions, Jerry?
No, just am grateful as well. So look forward to their next report.
Okay, thank you, Joe, very much. Can't wait to see that brochure or rough draft of that. All right. Next, we are looking at the dark sky lighting ordinance. Mike, I saw your name here somewhere. There you are. Are you here, Mike, with us? Mike Sims?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I see you.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you.
Good. Can I jump in?
You can jump in. You've got the floor.
So I think we're going to tag team this, because sometimes I buffer and sometimes my equipment buffers. So Layla's got her finger on a button, because I would like to run you through some of the slides, about 10 slides regarding this new ordinance. So first of all, hello, and thank you all for being here. Whoever's listening, watching, thanks for giving me a few minutes to kind of introduce or give you some information. When we last met, we took some questions from folks with council, and we kind of put that together with some information so that we could come up with the next step, which would be sort of our draft idea here. Before I get started, I'd really like to thank Max. He's not here today, but it would be so much harder without him. So thanks to Max. Really appreciate his assistance throughout the whole thing. Outside of all of that intro stuff, that's it. Outdoor lighting ordinance, Layla. What we're going to jump into is sort of what this looks like, and I can kind of buzz through this this city council or this council ordinance. Whereas reducing light, our goals would be to reduce light pollution at night preserves. Oops, let me see hold on. I think I'm overlaying my camera stuff onto my deal. Okay. So whereas reducing light pollution at night preserves and protects the natural environment, and whereas limiting light pollution will enhance the quality of life within the city of Manzanita for humans and wildlife. And whereas the city of Manzanita can regulate and enforce limitations to outdoor lighting to achieve these goals. And whereas the city of Manzanita has determined that it is the public's best interest to implement regulations to protect and preserve the environment and enhance the livability of the city. As we move on, we get to the definitions portions of the ordinance. We've included just these entries and these definitions. Once again, fully shielded. We talked about this before. The idea is the light fixture itself has a solid barrier at the top of the fixture in which the lamp is located. The fixture is angled so that the lamp is not visible below the barrier at a horizontal plane. And of course, I can go into and answer questions regarding that, but since I may buffer, I'll take your questions at the end. It'll be a quick couple of more slides. Also, definitions as far as Kelvin, we did adopt that into the situation, used in lighting to measure the color temperature of a particular light bulb, and you will see that later in the slideshow. Landscape lighting, we've determined that landscape lighting is designated to illuminate walkways, trees, shrubs, ponds, and other landscape features. We've defined light trespass as the unattended or excessive illumination of adjacent properties, public spaces, or sensitive environments due to poorly designated, directed, or uncontrolled outdoor lighting. Owner, that's been defined many times within our city ordinances. Patio lighting is something we came up with. Temporary lighting to include string lights, lights that may plug in or that are solar powered lights, lights that should have a measurement of 3,000 kelvins or less. Again, I can answer questions regarding that as we get there. We also added to that seasonal lighting, which would be temporary lighting installed and operated in connection with holidays or traditions. So section 1 would be the definitions. Moving along, example, like a little visual example of those fully shielded. I shared this slide with you folks last time, but again, it's just an example of different fully shielded fixtures. Moving along in the definitions, when we talk about visual aids to those definitions, we talked about landscape lighting and of course what they're designed to do. These are just examples. There's all kinds. You can find them anywhere. But this is what we were thinking of when we're talking about adding definitions to this ordinance. When we talk about light trespass, the unintended excessive illumination of adjacent properties, this is also a slide that we used last time, and I think it's a very good example. And if I can I know that everything's a little bit smaller on my screen, but there's obviously useful light, glare zones, direct glare, light trespass. That's kind of the big one that I'm always looking for. Not to discount any of the others. And then upward reflected light, then of course light reflected back from the heavy clouds if we get that so often. Moving along to other visual examples of our definitions. Patio lighting or that string lighting. We have I've personally responded in the middle of the night to noise complaints where folks have these maybe in a backyard around a hot tub or a fire pit or something like that. But this is the idea. There's probably other examples of this. But really what we're looking to really key in on is that 3,000 kelvins or less. That can be found at the time of purchase. Again, some of the products available will actually have Kelvin ratings, and some of them are actually endorsed by the Dark Sky Alliance. But other definitions, moving along to seasonal lighting, just the classic Christmas lights, if you will, Halloween lights. Some folks actually use this as landscape lighting. I wouldn't have an issue with that, but again, temporary lighting installed or operated in connection with holidays or traditions. So that's going to be some examples, like visual aids, if you will, of some of the definitions we came up with. It's pretty obvious for most of those. But if we talk about the meat and potatoes of this, the next two slides, this one being the first, kind of talks about what we had to work with when we started. And that would be Manzanita's 1003 ordinance. Section 4 specifically is the standards that were set at that point just for short-term rentals. And of course, we're looking to expand this citywide. So right off the bat, if we just burn through 1 through 4, and I can actually skip to, you can see that Sorry. Hey, Johnny. So Manzanita Ordinance 10.3, Section 4, outdoor lighting to minimize light pollution, glare, light trespass, and to protect dark skies. That's where we start with. Outdoor light fixtures shall be shielded, and the bulb should be pointed in a downward direction so that light does not radiate from the sides or the top. Obviously, we can just strike out right there, opaque side, top, and covers. It's kind of redundant at that point, so it's pretty easy to strike that one. We completely took out number 2, bulbs shall be warm rather than daylight, and either the amber or the low emission LEDs for the 3000 kelvins that were mentioned. Moving along to number 3, lights shall be turned off when they're not in use. They should not be left on for more than 12 hours. As an alternative, porch lights may be fitted with motion detectors. We didn't have to strike much of that because it's pretty self-explanatory and very agreeable. Number 4, security floodlights shall be on motion detectors and must not shine on adjacent houses. That's pretty key right there. So I'd mentioned this being the first of 2 slides that were really meat and potatoes. So here's an example, or that was an example of what we had, what we struck, and then here's a lot of the stuff that we kept from that. And then we also added C and D to be included from the definitions, which actually gives us an opportunity to define these. We know about number 1, or excuse me, we know about A, we know about B. C, patio lighting shall be prohibited between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. We're looking to follow up on that. That's going to be pretty easy, especially because I expect this to be sort of combined with noise ordinance or noise maybe complaints or concerns. So if we show up, that's a pretty easy one right there to enforce and just remind folks that, hey, we have an ordinance, it's time to shut your lights out. D, we've added D, landscape lights shall be prohibited from illuminating in an upwards direction beyond the property boundaries. And this one may give you some food for thought. Would like to see what you think about this one when I'm finished up here in a second. But and then of course E, security floodlights shall be on a motion detector. Must not shine on adjacent houses, super important. So that was section 1, section 2, and then section 3, we get to exemptions. The exemptions would be seasonal lighting installed and operated in connection with holidays. I'm proposing that I've never had to enforce anything. I've never had to hear any complaints about seasonal lighting. I think it would be something to think about in the future if it became a problem, but it just seems to me that this would be an easy exemption, just so folks have an additional guideline. Section 4 is just as excuse me, going back to section 3, which and to include the American flag. We all know that it must can be displayed at all times if it's illuminated during darkness. So that's obviously light shining upward beyond, somebody's property boundaries or whatnot. But that's going to be an exemption, or at least it was a pretty easy exemption to just add in there. Section 4 would be penalties. And we talked about before in our previous meeting that Ms. Kozlowski had an example of, and it wasn't really her shop, but we had lights that were not shielded and then lights that were shielded. We're suggesting that $250 may be a good place to start as far as discussion regarding violations or penalties. And of course, that's after we look to gain compliance. So always the number 1 goal, we want to gain compliance on those, a lot of these city ordinances. Before we have to really enforce, we'd like to educate folks first. So with that, staff recommendations. Of course, we've got a few. We need to amend Manzanita Ordinance 94-4. I suggest that we, after discussion amongst yourselves, adopting this new city ordinance citywide, and then of course striking the current short-term rental, which would be section 4I of ordinance 10-3. So that's kind of what we've been up to since we last spoke. Not exactly sure how I can see everybody, but I'm working on that so that I can take questions. I think I can see faces now. That's what I got for you. So we'd love to take questions, or at least write questions down in case I have to research and get back to you.
Mike, I was wondering if I think there was some discussion previously at the meeting. Do you give warnings the first time and then move into a citation on a second violation?
Well, it kind of depends on if it's the same violation a second time. It just sort of depends, because if we're talking about short-term rentals, there's a process where they would be that communication between any officer, a code enforcement officer, a Manzanita police officer, has to contact somebody regarding an incident. We have a week that's kind of set. So Judy has this program as the short-term manager where there's 3 strikes before it's possible that they could be cited and then lose their license. As far as non-short-term rentals, I can't say that I just give one warning and then show up with a citation next time. Education is the goal here. It's going to take a while to get folks on board. For example, it might take a few years to become compliant with this ordinance. So I don't know if I would show up a second time heavy-handed with enforcement, but it's very possible. Depending on how many times, if we discover that this may be a problem house, maybe it's not a short-term rental. Maybe it's just a part-time person that comes down and parties on the weekends. And maybe this weekend it's noise and next weekend it's lights. It kind of just depends. Having violations, I do get a chance to exercise discretion. And when I do that, I would have to take into consideration like the totality of the circumstances at the time, which may include previous warnings in a long-winded answer.
Thank you.
Sure.
Questions from the floor? Any for Mike? Catherine? Mm-hmm.
Hey, Mike.
Hello.
So the thing I still have a little trouble getting my head around, because I haven't lived anywhere that's had a dark sky setup. So I don't have any personal experience with knowing like how different it really feels. But the one thing that keeps coming back to me that still bothers me is the idea of just personal safety. So, you know, as I grew up, how I lived, I mean, there's this notion of you do keep, it's not a big light, it's not something obtrusive, it's not a flare, you know, pointing at a neighbor, but the notion that you keep some lights on your property that actually do shed some light as a deterrent for someone coming onto your property in the middle of the night is something I've just grew up with, am accustomed to, and believe in. So how does this fit in for people who are, you know, living alone, perhaps, are concerned about that, concerned about visitors and people they don't know on their street who just want to create and kind of send a message that somebody's here, this is lit, this is not a good place to approach. And since you're public safety officer, you seem like the perfect person to answer that for me. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of thoughts. Number one, nowadays, folks are able to relatively easy outfit their property with motion lights. So motion lights can be tripped by anything: raccoons, squirrels, bad guys, police officers responding. So that's just, you asked me about my thoughts. One of my thoughts is outfitting with motion lights. But number two, I share that view with you. I think it's important to light up the whole block, especially as a first responder. However, I think there's a way we can meet in the middle when we start talking about outfitting properties, or at least gaining compliance by folks installing shielded lights that still provide plenty of lights for the walkway, the front of the house, especially that address marker, which is like the most important in the middle of a rainy or not rainy, but very dark night. When you ask me about my thoughts, I'm with you. I think a dark sky ordinance is really going to, and I'd mentioned it before, really going to help folks that live next door to somebody that's constantly got their lights on, and it's just light trespassing through and into their house. I think if we meet in the middle, thoughts that come to mind is, if we have to educate folks about buying curtains, well, maybe that's something that they need to consider as well. So when you ask me about safety, I'm a big fan of lighting it up. we have to meet in the middle. We've got to have some folks that say, well, livability goes down if I close my windows and my front room is lit up. But the quick answer again is going back to discussing options to include security lighting, motion lighting, timed lighting. But I think you have a valid point when it comes to safety. I'm a big fan of big bright lights, but it's not my opinion that matters. That should cover the entire city as far as the ordinance.
If I could just jump in real quick too, it's a good point, Catherine. So Section 2, prohibited uses of lighting. Light shall be turned off when not in use and shall not be left on for more than 12 consecutive hours. And then we have another line there that says porch lights may be fitted with motion detectors. This is, someplace we could use your feedback on, because this is just our suggestion. I don't think there's anything in here, like we had a long discussion in staff as to whether or not there should be time limits on landscape lighting, for example. And I argued that that's for, safely walking to your front door. I know I can't get to my front door without having landscape lighting. So as long as it's shielded and facing down, it's actually not light trespassing, and it is contributing to dark sky. So if that's a concern of council, we can sort of amend the draft ordinance to either not have a time limit, so strike Section B of prohibited uses, or just strike the section that reflects porch lights, because one could argue that a porch light is in use at all times because it's providing that kind of safety measure. And I don't know what, Mike, your thoughts are on that, but that might be one way, because staff was trying to be conscious of that. I think we heard that as a comment, maybe even from you as a citizen, that we wanted to make sure that those safety measures were in place and that we just didn't want excessive light on. But I think that the point of light at night is primarily for safety and access. So we don't want this to be overly prohibitive, resulting in the lack of understanding of the ordinance and kind of being counter to other things. So if I'm hearing Mike say that I'm a proponent of light, my suggestion would be that we either drop Section B or we drop the portion relating to porch lights and just assume that a porch light being on during, that's what would be my recommendation, if that's something that council would like for us to do.
What was Section B?
Section 2B, light shall be turned off when not in use and shall not be left on for more than 12 consecutive hours. Porch lights may be fitted with motion detectors. Dan actually made the point when he reviewed this that the shortest day of the year is less than 10 hours.
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
So,
if the lights are required to point down and be shielded, it seems like it enables the safety factor, but doesn't shine in somebody's bedroom window across the street. So doesn't this cover that? I mean, my assumption was that these were shaded lights, fully shielded lights.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. That's kind of what I'm saying. Right. Yeah.
So wouldn't that answer then?
Yeah, I think the shielded light requirement addresses that issue. So we would just drop Section 2B and rely on the shielding. So if someone complains because their neighbor's porch light's on and it's blaring and there's no shielding, then we can do something about that. Now, Mike, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Well, as Catherine had pointed out, being a public safety official, I'm a proponent of light. So to me, a porch light is a little bit different than lighting up the entire side of the garage, the back side of the house, which would then in turn, if it's unshielded, then in turn trespass. So if a porch light is the exemption or I would have no problem. In fact, some folks would say, well, then you're just going to have to fine me because I'm leaving my porch lights on. It's a safety issue. And I would be there fining them and agreeing with them at the same time.
But if they had to use the shielded fixtures, then they wouldn't be in violation.
Perfect. Yeah, as long as it's shielded, that's what we're looking for, and they feel
Okay.
comfortable with safety.
Okay, I just,
I'm not saying unshielded light.
yeah,
Sure,
okay.
let's
I
have
just
10
want to
lights
make sure I
shielded.
understand.
Great. Yeah, perfect. We're on the same page.
Okay.
So, Catherine, what do you feel about that? What's your reaction?
Well, I couldn't even tell you what a Kelvin is, so I'm not here as an extremely informed person. I guess I'm going to represent the person who doesn't know very much about this and is just saying what she thinks. So bear with me. I just don't know, and I'm going to have to hurry up and get some experience. I don't know how much light a fully shielded light can project. And I'm just for this one. I won't always do this, but for this one, I'm just thinking about my house. So there's a big porch area. People have to come up steps. I don't always know if people are going to come up. It's night a lot of the time in the winter. I'm not a fan of the motion detector lights. They tend to startle people, and they don't know what they're coming into until they come on. They're kind of odd. And in my experience in our neighborhood, it's the motion lights that are on a lot more times than anything else because the raccoons are constantly coming back and forth. But so I just don't know if the fully shielded lights provide the light coverage. And frankly, I don't want landscape lighting. So do I have to put landscape lighting in now to compensate for the fact that what used to be a porch light that covered our patio area does not only really covers a very, they're designed to go down and be narrow, right? I've got one installed in the back, and it's really tiny. We did it on purpose so that we wouldn't be bothering our neighbors behind us if we ever had to turn it on. And it's barely enough to, see where the key goes in the door. So I don't know it's just, I don't know how to answer the question. It's still something I just don't know. And I feel kind of silly even going through that example, but that's actually what's going through my mind.
You're not alone.
Right.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, that's
think
actually one of the biggest objections to something like this is that it limits the type of lighting because it limits the space in which what was the term, Mike, usable light, or so perhaps the addition of landscape lighting may be required, but there's a range of options that it just can't trespass beyond your property boundary or trespass into a neighbor's. So there's probably a range, and some are very small. They call it a candle, so where the light is actually transferring. So it can be down. It can also be wider, but it is different than just a porch light that's super bright and you can see, kind of makes your whole front yard noticeable.
The other piece of this is that I've heard from several STR owners who feel that they have to comply to this ordinance, but their neighbors don't. So to me, it seems like it's one step in kind of the good neighbor policy, and that we all are living by the same sort of ordinance. So I would certainly like to see it move forward and revisit and tweak it a year from now. It would be good advice, but.
So I think there are some dark sky lights that give pretty good coverage. I've talked to Jo about it, and she's been involved with this for a long time. So I think there are some lights, and I also think that there may be some sacrifices that have to be made to keep the community in if we decide to move forward with dark sky. We may have to change. I know in my area, I'm definitely going to have to put in some kind of landscape lighting because without that direct light, people just would not be able to get to the front door. The question I have is that this all sounds, in essence, I think a good strategy and something that I completely believe that the community is behind, and at least from everybody I've talked to, this is something that people want to try. And I agree with the mayor, we may have to revisit it a year from now. But what about the street lights? Have we thought about the street lights? And because, they are very bright. And can we work with PUD to get a different lighting? And if so, One of the areas that I think has done a really good job of that is Pine Ridge, in the lighting that they have in Pine Ridge. So have we talked? I mean, is that something that's part of the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, Dan, I know is on here and can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the PUD, we asked them to shield, they will. So maybe Dan can jump in real quick and provide some input on that.
Hello. Yeah. So about a year and a half ago, we did ask PUD to change the lighting out in Manzanita in the city limits, and they did so to the dark sky approved lights. I did actually just literally finish and send off a request, though, that the city see about putting shrouds on the lights, because they do have that option that they do for homeowners that might have light that's getting in their homes and stuff. They're more than happy to come out and put those. But essentially, because of everything we're doing, we're actually putting a request out that they just kind of do that to all of them. So it still lights down the road, but it really will limit that to essentially bleed out of light out of the street areas.
So have we talked to the county at all about Ocean Road? I know that's a county road, but man, those lights down by the ocean where you would be, it would be great to see the sky. Have we asked the county if they might ask to have dark sky lighting down there?
Those lights have been changed out as well.
Have they?
The old sodium lights to the LED ones, and those ones PUD treated as they were inside the city limits. So I imagine they would be doing the same there.
Oh, good. Excellent. And then one last question. I remember years ago coming into downtown Manzanita when it was dark. I mean, it was really dark. And what a group of people did is talk to the merchants. And now if you go downtown, it's at night, it's not overly bright, but at least it's welcoming and people are there. Or have we talked to the business community about dark sky lighting? And is that something that they are willing or okay with complying with?
No, we haven't reached out to them. If council would like us to do so before we do this, we can certainly do that. We discussed it as staff. I don't know that it has a huge impact on businesses necessarily beyond private homeowners. So we didn't go out and canvass private homeowners either. But we can take some time to do that and reach out and ask folks. We did have a discussion with staff as whether or not we should create zones, and determined that it should apply across the board. So I think if that's council's direction, we can certainly take time and go reach out to those folks.
If I could jump in real quick, I believe I recall of a brief conversation with Brad when this kind of all kicked off, and I want to say he may have mentioned talking with businesses regarding dark sky. I don't know if I know that he certainly didn't come to me and say this is their response, but I want to say that in with the folks that were talking, that approached him about it, were some businesses.
Okay, right, good.
And you can always, an ordinance process has public hearings involved, and so if they have any objections, they can certainly.
Well, the only issue I have with that is just because I've worked with businesses so long, they really don't have a lot of time to come to the meetings. Unfortunately, I mean, at least they can see them on video, but I think it's always good to reach out to businesses and just kind of involve them. Maybe not ask them, but just say, this is what we're doing. And it might affect you. I think connection with the businesses is a really important thing to do.
That's huge. Mm-hmm. I agree completely with you, Linda.
I'd like staff to do that before this gets any further along, so we can take a couple months and do that outreach and come back.
That'd be great.
That would be wonderful.
All right.
Jerry, do you have anything to add?
Actually, I was going to, this kind of dovetails with this last bit of conversation. I was going to ask Layla and Mike if they were pretty much ready to come forward for a first reading in October, and if so, is there a way for us to make maximum use of the 3 weeks between the work session and the meeting so that we could get some further input from the community, and also because several counselors have come up with some interesting questions today. Work session is certainly an opportunity to thrash through some of those and try to figure out if we're all ready to roll. And on an issue like this, even though on one hand it's kind of a simple proposition, it's one that we know. Well, I agree with Linda, there's broad community support for it. We know that there are different opinions on different aspects of it. And so it'd be good to use the time between the work session and the first reading to flesh out some of that lingering disparity or diversity, I should say, of thought out there. Now, since it sounds like we're going to slow this down a little bit to get business community input, I just think we should sort of create informally kind of a public comment period to get people to weigh in so that we can both make sure we get this right before we go to a first reading, and also so that some of the questions that Catherine and others have raised, we can resolve those. I think Mike and Max and Joe with the committee and Brad and a lot of people have contributed to the product so far, and it's probably pretty close to being ready for that first reading. But as long as we're not going to have it in October, let's just figure out a way to make sure people out there know where we're at, and if they got something to say, this would be a great time to say it.
I offer suggestions to do that that's efficient and wouldn't really be hugely burdensome on staff. Since we do have a draft ordinance, I think we'd want to get concurrence around the draft language from council today. We could post a survey and send it out to the listserv and have it online for a few weeks. Wow. One thing I'll note is we do need attorney review of an ordinance. It's just kind of something I like to have legal review of something. James has taken a cursory look, but I don't expect there to be substantive changes.
Right.
And could prepare for another work session in November, which would give us time to get the survey out, get some data back, process that, come back to you, share that information with you. You may have and I only say November, by the way, because our October work session is already filled. So we could do that in November, provide you with a summary of what we heard, and then that would give staff time to propose any potential amendments to the ordinance to respond to that community feedback. And then you guys can have another discussion about that in November. And if at that time we feel we have enough information to advance it to a first reading, I imagine that it takes a couple weeks to get full legal review. We can endeavor to do it in December, but I would say January is probably a more realistic timeframe for a first reading. So I'm happy to facilitate that. That actually saves us quite a bit of time if we do it. And that gives a broad cross-section of folks the opportunity. We can ask them what they are.
You would send out a survey, is that what you're saying? Or you would
we'd post on our website and Facebook and send it out to our listserv, and then the survey would be available online through our website, and we would put it up for a short, period of time, and then get that information back, process it, and come back to y'all in November work session.
That's a great idea.
And the questions from the survey would come from where?
Well, I think the questions you've just asked, really, which is, city council's considering the attached draft ordinance. Are you supportive or not? If not, tell us why and what your concerns are, and then we can summarize those concerns into themes. I think we keep it pretty simple.
Okay, that sounds great. Offer community input. Wonderful. Any other further discussion then? It sounds like, in recap, Jerry, is your hand up? No.
Nope.
No. Sounds like in recap, then we're kind of kicking the can down a little bit so that we have time to get public input. That will be done through a survey that will be on the city website that will go along with some of the discussion points from today. And the ordinance does have to go through legal review, but is probably in pretty good shape. Did I understand that?
Yeah, I think it is. I do, before we close up on the topic, I just wanted to make sure, are there any proposed changes at this time based on your initial review? And also just to remind that we're actually going to have to amend 2 other ordinances. Timing wise, we'll have to figure out when, but we do have to amend the Manzanita zoning ordinance. And we do have to amend 1003 so that it references the citywide ordinance, or we just strike the language from 1003 so that we don't have different standards for short-term rentals and so we have to figure out the most efficient way to do that. So some housekeeping items. The MZO might even come later. And I just need to get some guidance on that from the city attorney and try to do those amendments all at once when we're doing other changes. But
all right. Sounds good.
So I guess the question is, we had talked about potentially the removing prohibited use of lighting, section 2B. Do we want to leave that in? Is there interest in changing that? You could also.
That's the 12-hour.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the
12 consecutive hours? Yes.
I think we should leave it in. Would it be dark more than 12 hours?
Yes. It could be dark up to, I think, 16 hours at a time.
Really? Okay.
14, because I think the shortest day of the year is just shy of 10 hours.
Okay. Well, either change it to 14 instead of 12.
That would be fine if there's consensus around that. Staff's happy to make that change. Okay. We'll do that. Great. So we'll do that and get this up on the web as soon as we can.
And I'll take the responsibility of making sure businesses know that it's up on the website and to chime in if they have any feelings about it.
And could you be sure to include the Hoffman Center in that?
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, you did an excellent job. Took a lot of information and pared it down. And I think it feels like we're moving in the right direction with your.
I had lots of help from lots of people, including Max, Joe, and the city, and you folks. So thanks again for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving on to Layla, 20 is 20. Do you want to walk us through this?
Sure. It's just, we talked about it briefly, but the 20 is plenty. So I want to thank Mr. It was Tom that came to our regular session meeting last week.
Right.
Staff have actually been working on for the last couple of months. We've been discussing kind of internally this concept of lowering speed limits in the city of Manzanita on all roads to 20 miles per hour. So we did a little background research and determined that as the road authority, which effectively the city council acts as that authority because you're the ones that make those kinds of decisions, we have the ability to lower speeds 5 miles per hour, which would mean that we do have the opportunity to reduce speeds in city limits to 20. So I wanted just an opportunity to talk with the city council about that and just sort of talk about the sort of policy framework in which this is based on. So while we did get good public comment on that, the transportation system plan policies to create a more walkable, bikeable, safe environment, I think really speak to, you have policy and then you have implementation. And so I think so my recommendation and request for discussion today is that moving the city to a 20-mile-an-hour citywide speed limit does help us implement those policies to create a more walkable and bikeable community. We are kind of the poster child for what they call yield roadway system. So folks will notice that the only sidewalks that we have in the city of Manzanita are on Lanita, which is our only major collector street, which is a 20-mile-an-hour street. And, the goal is to keep it that way. Sidewalks are expensive. They create additional stormwater runoff. The infrastructure required for us to have sidewalks on every street would eliminate tons of parking, would be really problematic. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that shared roadway systems are actually more effective and can be more safe, can be very safe for both pedestrians and cyclists, but speeds are traditionally the problem. So what staff is proposing to do is we have a number of things that that we need to do in order to achieve that. So we're already working on it internally because I kind of got an initial head nod last week, but I wanted to give you a heads up on kind of what next steps would be for us. So would be conducting research on what the legal steps we would need to take, and that's likely the development of an ordinance to implement that citywide. And as part of that, one of the items that's in the transportation system plan is the creation of what they call a sharrow. And a sharrow is a place where a bike can legally take the full lane of a road. So we're investigating what it would take and whether or not we can just do that by right now, or whether or not there would be additional legislation or ordinance language we would need to put in place to make those actually happen. Those are outlined in the city's transportation systems plan. So we would be using the bicycle network as our foundation. And staff is currently going out and mapping kind of existing signage, existing speeds throughout the city. Whether they're city or county roads, we did determine that we do have jurisdiction to change speed limits within our city limits. But what we also want to avoid is like we're 20 miles and then you get beyond that and it's a posted 35 mile. I don't know if that actually exists. Yeah. So we're going about mapping that to see if there's any opportunities, I should say, to coordinate with the county to make sure there's kind of consistency. And my hope is that they would be amenable to that discussion. So we're going out kind of mapping all of that. And then staff is also going to start putting together a budget proposal for next fiscal year, because the cost to sign this, we can't enforce a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit unless it's signed. So for example, we actually just put up a new, as a kind of a test measure on Classic Street, a battery operated dynamic sign.
Yeah, kudos.
Yeah, they're $4,000 each. But they're excellent deterrents.
Yeah,
and they do make a significant difference. At least that's what PD's telling me, and they're out there. They're the ones responsible for enforcing this. So we think that would be, we want to do both a combination of signage and as many low-cost solutions we can. So $4,000 not cheap, but in the long term, I do think it produces the outcome from a policy perspective that we want. So we're going to go out and kind of indicate where we think those would be most effective, and then where additional signs need to be placed. And again, prioritizing the map in the TSP that is for the bike network. And then that's where our public safety team would focus on enforcement of the speed limits. And so that's kind of, there's a number of steps we need to take, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there. It's going to require some staff resources. And ultimately what staff would do is, we kind of go dark for a couple of months, work on this, come back to you at another work session, probably early part of the year, where we have gathered all this information. We even maybe perhaps have a draft ordinance for you to consider, and an estimate of what we think it will cost and where those locations will be and what partnerships we need to do to be successful. In the interim, what we can do is, I mentioned this previously that, the Portland Bureau of Transportation did a really great outreach campaign for advisory speed limits. So again, we can't enforce them, but they had these signs up kind of everywhere on bikeways that said, 20 is plenty, or advisory speed is 15 miles per hour. And they were these great little, like the political signs that people put out in their yards. And so I would be interested in, between now and the time we implement a 20 mile an hour, is putting together something like that. I don't think it would be cost prohibitive. I can do some research and see what it would cost to print up, 100 of these types of signs that folks can just put in their yards now. We can't enforce it, but I think it does affect behavior. And do that while we're working on getting the appropriate ordinance in place in order for us to lower speed limits. And so if y'all are amenable to that, I was going to work with Josh, who also does some graphic design, to come up with some options. And then we could spend a few $100 and get some of these signs that citizens, if they want to, can put them in their own yards, and just kind of advise people, like, pedestrians are here, like, slow down. There's no need for you to go 35, 40 miles an hour through our neighborhoods. They would also be helpful because we won't have signage in many of the neighborhoods once we do implement the 20 mile an hour speed limit. So I think that what I'm kind of looking for from council is, support and, or at least consensus that, yes, we're interested in a 20 mile an hour. I just wanted you and the community to understand the policy connection to the TSP and implementing that TSP. I'm a big fan of plans, but I'm more interested in implementing those plans. And so this allows us to really get moving on that, and likely, I think very likely, have a good portion of this put in place before next summer during our busy season. And then in the meantime, getting citizens interested and excited about it by putting out these, advisory signs, which Eric told me very clearly, like, we can't cite them for, going 25 in a zone that's actually 25, but we can put advisory signs out to just, like, slow down and be mindful. So those are kind of two pieces of direction I'd love to get from y'all, and then also answer any questions you might have about next steps in the approach.
Okay. Questions or comments?
Yeah. So Layla, I think in many ways, this is a proposal like the last one that goes to the heart of what a lot of people would define as livability in the community. Unlike the last one, I don't think there's going to be as much discussion back and forth. It's a simpler measure, and probably more uniformly popular measure. So, but I do think that it's the kind of thing in a small town people want to hear about, want to know about, want to get a heads up about. So, if there's any way to sort of tack information onto what we've already agreed is going to be an outreach to the community on the dark skies thing, just to add on something like about this, or to use one of your water bill opportunities in the near future. I think this is a real good topic to get out there and let people chew on. As you say, the more education that we can do preceding adoption, the more likely implementation is going to go well. So,
yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. And I would say that, I feel like the policy, unlike Dark Sky, you have a pretty strong policy backing in the extensive outreach and engagement that went on for the TSP. I think it's a great idea to put it into the water bill. Another kind of good thing about going to monthly is that we will now have the ability to do that more frequently instead of every quarter.
Right.
So we're still several months away probably from proposing anything. So if you're comfortable with that, I would suggest we do that and do it through the water bill, whether it's this quarter. This quarter, we're going to try to focus on letting people know that we're going to monthly billing. But in our first monthly bill, which will be in November, I think it's November. Don't quote me on that just yet, but I'm pretty sure it's November, that we will, we can put that into there and kind of let folks know what the path forward is on it.
Okay.
Does it make any sense to put the 20 mile an hour in the survey that you're thinking about putting out for the dark sky?
If you wish, like I was saying, I feel like the TSP really already provides us with that policy framework, but we can put it in there, sure.
I think it would be a good idea. And I've also seen some of those signs you're talking about, and they're really humorous. I mean, it is a solid message, but it's done with humor. And I think you also said, if I remember correctly, that we could put those in the right of way. Because the right of way,
we can.
You would,
yes.
Yeah, okay.
So
well, you would probably right away. Because I think because I think in my neighborhood, it's better if it's in the right of way because you can really see it. So I really encourage you to do that. I think those are really good.
We totally made them funny.
Yeah, they were great.
Catherine, your thoughts?
I'm very supportive of it. I think what I like about this conversation, and as it relates to the other things we've talked about tonight, is, I mean, it's the theme of kind of slowing it down, quieting it down.
Safety.
I'm not ready to say getting dark yet. I'm going to work on that one between now and our next meeting. But this theme is just, and it's good to, I think in our communications about this, it's good to be connecting all those things, because it's about maintaining and creating an atmosphere of why people want to be there in the first place. And I think people will generally be supportive of it. I wouldn't rule out that we'll get some feedback. And I'm thinking of a couple local drivers I know of who are, I'm always like, slow it down when they go by. Not on my street. I want to be clear about that. Yeah, so there'll be that, and people who don't appreciate all the rules. I wish the city would quit doing that. I wish we could just use common sense. But that said, I think it's good, and I think the idea of the kind of advanced campaign awareness thing is good, and it just builds on what a number of people do anyway with their own yard signs about slow it down, kids on the block, that kind of thing. So when it's done well, I think people really appreciate it, and it gives people, something to think about while we're getting ready to be able to enforce. So I'm supportive and appreciative of the work that you're going to be doing on this.
Right. Well, it was, I was really ecstatic when I went down Classic and saw that blazing thing that told me I was going 22 miles an hour. And then I stopped and thought, I wonder what the speed limit is along here. And I think it's 25. And the next time I walked down there, I checked, and it is 25. But I think those additional signs, put one on that post where that light is flashing our mileage, our MPH, would be a good idea. But thank you for getting that out on Classic Street. And I didn't realize they were $4,000, but I think that's money very well spent. Public safety and livability and slowing down, and kudos for that. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's all I needed. So I have my marching orders, and
you're good to go. Okay, you're good to go. Sounds like you've done a lot of work on it already, which we appreciate. Is there anything else before we wrap up?
Not for me.
Okay, then Catherine, you survived your first meeting. Thank you for your input. And
thank you. I enjoyed it more than survived.
Yeah, survived.
Thanks for the patience.
And I will adjourn this meeting at 3:49. Thank you.
Thank you.